we're going to talk a bunch here about Commanders, the Bears, Caleb Williams, Jayden Daniels, because for those of you who don't know, this is Howard Dunne of the Go Long Substack. That is a huge pillar of the NFL community over here on Substack. He wrote the deep dive into the sort of the Bears, Caleb Williams dysfunction of it all this offseason that we want to get into leading into this game and talk a lot about other NFL stuff. I'm going to I haven't done this before, Tyler. I'm going to use the audio here for my other podcast too, so we're going to get double you. So I'm going to do the fake intro right now for that. That
Hey,
that make sense? That work?
whatever you want. I'm just along for the ride here. I know we'll have some viewers, subscribers coming over too. The email was just shot out to the Go Long community. I see some of them joining now, which is awesome. But yeah, man, I thought I'd be down there in person in Commander Country this week, but that's just a little delayed. So we'll do one of these in the flesh as well. It's long overdue, Ben. It's awesome to see what you're building with your community of readers. I've become a Substack shill through and through. I think it is the future in every way, and we can hang out with all of our readers directly like this. Not many people can do stuff like that.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. So again, Tyler Dunne is joining us here, founder of the Go Long Substack that does a great job, and it's really like one for somebody like me who was like, okay, what do I do now when I don't when I'm in this sort of fork in the road moment of my career, and I was able to look at him and say, oh, wait a minute, this is somebody who's not just like open to Substack and holding out you know holding out a cup, hoping somebody will like drop in a dime or two. Like this guy is like legit thriving, and as I
That's the
said,
best analogy. It's so true.
well, and as I said, you wrote sort of the definitive story here of like what's been going on with the Bears and Caleb Williams. There's a Jayden Daniels component to this too, and obviously sort of a separate issue. Ben Johnson turning down the Commanders for an interview back in 2024. There's a lot going on here with these two teams. Oh, by the way, there was also a Hail Mary last year that half of the fan base here will loves, the other half wishes would just never get mentioned again. But thanks for doing this. Let's start with this before we get to everything else. You mentioned Substack and the future and all that. I am curious where you think this is going because it was. Well, I guess first of all, how did you kind of get started with this? Because ultimately, I think everybody's origin story is really fascinating, and like I said, you built up one of the biggest followings here, and you get recognized nationally in the various awards that the NFL media aspects. Like you're not just like doing this, nobody paying attention. So, how did you kind of get started with this, and what's been the experience like?
Experience has been awesome, life changing. Gosh, we've got 3 kids and we built a house. So, to kind of run the household, you have to do something that's successful. And I've been asked, by college kids and colleagues, what I think we all try to ask, why do we do this? Right. And for me, the why has always been, I just want to be the best husband, best father I can be. I've always wanted to be a sports writer. So if I'm covering the NFL anywhere and people are willing to pay me for what I'm doing, that's number one. But to answer your question, man, I started at the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel, covering the Packers from like 2011 to 2015. Then I came back home to Western New York to cover the Bills at the Buffalo News, that 2015 season, which, man, Ben, I'm sure you've had these moments too. I wish I took more meticulous notes. It was year one of Rex Ryan. Crazy shit went down every day. I mean, you've got LaShawn McCoy putting out the flyer for a party, woman only. Then he's having a press conference saying, hey, it was no weird orgy thing, everybody. Nothing to worry about there. Got Aaron Cromer, who's, one of the best offensive line coaches in football today. At that point, he was maybe punching a teenager over a beach chair. What else happened? Sammy Watkins, the first conversation I had, demanding the ball 10 times a game. All hell breaks loose from that. They were having players only meetings all the time, it seemed. Richie Incognito, that's where he resurrected his career. He was like the 874th craziest storyline, a player who was suspended for the quote unquote bullying and taking a baseball bat to his car and all of that. So, anyways, that season was so rejuvenating as a sports writer to cover that team day in and day out. And I remember Mario Williams too. I had players tell me he cared more about his remote control cars than playing for the Buffalo Bills. So that was fun start to finish. So I think Bleacher Report kind of took notice. At that point, they were expanding their um, just writing department. They were kind of all about slideshows and whatnot for a while, but then they hired Howard Beck to cover the NBA, myself to cover the NFL. Dan Pompei was around as well. He's at the Athletic now. He's fantastic. They really kind of fleshed that out, and we probably knew it wasn't going to last forever. I mean, if we had a story approved, they would just say, do whatever the hell you have to do, travel for a week. No expense was too much. So we're able to do some really great work at Bleacher Report for those 4.5 years. And I think that's really where I was able to kind of parachute into different markets, build a Rolodex beyond the Packers, beyond the Bills, get to know players, scouts, coaches around the NFL. And Bleach Report was not without its warts. There's a lot of different layers, a lot of different editors. But I kind
Sure.
of this is what I love to do. I love sitting down with a player, getting in his world, writing a player profile, doing a team deep dive like that story on the Packers, Aaron Rodgers, Mike McCarthy, Ted Thompson. Throwing myself into that divorce, which was very ugly. I think those are kind of the two lanes that I was really gravitated towards at that point. So inevitably, when Bleacher Report decided to kind of go back to the aggregation and the slideshows and the TikTok and they kind of got rid of all of us in one fell swoop, I didn't even know what Substack was. This is 2020. This is COVID, right? The world's
Right.
turned around. I just figured, what the hell? Like, I'll just start a Substack, write features, see if anybody wants to drop, $8 for a month, $50 for the year, and go down swinging in this business. I guess I shouldn't close every door, but I mean, it was pretty much go long or bust at that point. Substack or bust. Like, I'm gonna just cover the NFL the way I think it should be covered. If people want to support it, great. If not, I'll find something else to do. Because that was when I think we were having our second child at that point. Yeah, that's right. Gina was just found out she was pregnant, I believe, at that point. Now, um, to my surprised there are people out there willing to bust out the credit card, punch in the digits, and spend a half hour reading a story. And I'm just so grateful, so
Yeah.
indebted one as you are. So that is the very long winded response on how Go Long came to be. But been loving it, man. I'm so appreciative of everybody out there.
Oh, it's funny when you say spend a half an hour read a story. And in the case of the Caleb Williams Bear story, that's no joke. This was an epic one that so many people around the league I know were hitting me up. And obviously, I'm not connected to the Bears, but because Jayden Daniels and Caleb Williams are going to be tied as the number 1 and 2 picks of the 2024 draft. And, there was also, again, the Hail Mary thing. And, that game last year wasn't just a win for Washington. It very much felt like it catapulted both teams in the directions they ended up uh, going in. So there's a ton to get to. What, 3 parts? You talk to a million different people, with the Bears around the league about all of this. We want everybody to go read it if they haven't already. What's like sort of for you, like the main takeaway as to what was so interesting to you about this story?
So it's a three-parter. Part one relives the 2024 season there in Chicago with Caleb Williams, and that's kind of how the reporting started. I talked to coaches that were on that Bears staff. They were pissed off. They didn't like the narrative that they did nothing for Caleb Williams, a narrative that was really kind of pushed by Caleb Williams himself. And I think that when um, Seth Wickersham's excerpt came out, or the report came out from his upcoming book on Caleb saying, "Hey, nobody's showing me how to watch film," that's what I had talked to some coaches before that came out, but I think that's what really compelled more of them to speak their experiences, to share their experiences and provide not just like scathing quotes, which there are many, but detail on what it was like to have these quote unquote babysitting sessions with Caleb Williams and show him how to watch film. And he would just literally walk away from them. Like they would tell him something in practice or during a game, and if he didn't like it, he would walk away, or in a meeting room. He's not really paying attention. He might be on the completely wrong page. Friday walkthroughs, the ball should never hit the turf. Those were disastrous. Saturday sessions where you're kind of going over the game plan for the last time and you're in the hotel room, maybe a convention center, just making sure all the I's are dotted, the T's are crossed. Those were disastrous. So that's kind of how it started. And I know part one is really what got a lot of the national attention because it was stuff that people hadn't really heard when it came to Caleb Williams, and I understand that. But to me, this really became a Ryan Poles series more than a Caleb Williams series. This was more about the general manager of a football team possessing the ultimate gift in pro sports, the number one overall pick in a draft that is just so rich at the quarterback position, and you don't do your due diligence. You quite literally laugh Drake May off the screen and say multiple times to your scouts in that draft meeting, "This makes my chest hurt." Really kind of shaping the conversation, the narrative, gently nudging everyone a certain direction instead of having a true objective conversation and debate. There was no debate when it came to Drake May and Jane Daniels. And the other quarterbacks aren't even really considered at all.
Right.
So, yeah, May is mocked and ridiculed. And when it came to Jayden Daniels, yeah, I think that what I was told is and I'll pull it up here so I can actually, provide a couple quotes from sources close to Jane Daniels and around the situation. But yeah, they did want to have him in for a visit. But at that point, it was so disingenuous and so not serious that Jane Daniels just turned down. Like, uh,
The-
it was.
Well, that's what was so interesting about it from the perspective here. Now, obviously, like everybody else, going into when you realize, hey, what the Commanders were 4-5 going to 20 in at that point, and then they lose all the rest of their games. So at 4-5, we're not really thinking they're going to be positioned to get Caleb Williams once he starts going. Oh, could you get Caleb Williams, the guy from here, who's this quarterback? And we know there's other quarterbacks, but he's clearly seemed to be the one guy. But what was so fascinating was that I don't recall seeing a team decide make it very clear way in advance that this was a foregone conclusion. And you're just like, wait a minute, Jayden Daniels won the Heisman. Drake May, I always keep saying, if you sort of like, if they made Jerry Maguire again and you had to cast the Jerry O'Connell character Cush, I'm casting Drake May because he looks the part, and we're going to go with the name Drake May to boot. And then you mentioned, McCarthy and Penix and whatever. Like, what? How are you just that confident? And also, Caleb Williams had a lot of questions. It wasn't just like he was this slam dunk guy on and off the field. I'm not saying he's like a bad guy, but there were definitely questions. That was the whole thing with him that offseason, so that they were so confident so early. I was like, huh, okay. I mean, maybe, but it was very odd that they just, like you said, from a due diligence perspective, seemed to just stop and just said, no, we're going with this guy.
And I think that's probably the number one criticism of Ryan Poles by his scouts that worked for him, and also people around the league. I've never heard other GMs talk about one of their own the way they talk about Ryan Poles. It is not pretty. You can see that in parts 2 and 3. But yeah, his mind was made up early. He was a scout in Kansas City who, what I was told, didn't mind taking credit for the selection of Patrick Mahomes, which is interesting. And there's the one GM for a team who said, "Yeah, I guess you have to do that to get one of these jobs." But there's people that thought he was full of shit for that. But yeah, he kind of saw his own Patrick Mahomes in Caleb Williams. And let's face it, everybody, me included, I was all in on Caleb Williams. I'm digesting him in 5 to 10 minute highlight reel clips on YouTube. He's the ultimate YouTube quarterback. He is fun as hell. Like, to me at USC, I'm thinking of him as like Allen Iverson on the 2001 Sixers, surrounded by Eric Snow and Aaron McKee and Todd McCullough and Matt Geiger. Of course, he had to do all this improvisational stuff because the
Right.
team around him wasn't that good. And I think if you did watch him down in and down out, game in and game out, you would see, as you should if you're a general manager or a scout, you would see these very real issues. But he told people close to him, like, December, if I don't take him, the media will kill me, which is nuts. Like, as a scout told me, if you think that way, you might as well let Mel Kiper be the GM and select, like,
Right.
because you've got to ask hard questions. And maybe those hard questions were asked. I don't know. I'm giving them some some levity here. I mean, maybe Ryan Poles, Ian Cunningham, Trey Colziel, and Jeff King. You know, they're the kind of the four people that run the Bears. Maybe they had their own conversations about these quarterbacks, but when they opened it up to the scouts and the directors and the coordinators, it was not a serious debate. And it was so, I mean, the Caleb train was moving at such a speed of like, this is our guy, that yes, Jayden Daniels' camp could pick up on it. So this is a source close to Daniels told me this quote, the entire time, the temperature of the whole situation was to take their guy at one. We see the writing on the wall. We don't want to have this whole big dog and pony show. So yeah, they're not going to go visit there. They were fine going to Washington, kind of turning their attention there, just kind of getting a sense for where the Bears were headed. And I don't know, man, like there's debates had about players you draft in the 7th round, in priority free agents. I mean, you're actually talking about medical stuff with those guys. They didn't talk about medical stuff with Caleb Williams, which allowed something to kind of slip through the cracks. They didn't really talk about his processing. They didn't talk about, um, real issues when it came to being coached hard. That stuff, it was all very positive. The Notre Dame game was a disaster. That was
Right.
really handled with any sort of skepticism or critique. But sure as hell, when it came to Jayden Daniels, there was concern. They talked about his Remember that picture of his elbow that went viral? I'm sure you're
Yeah,
like
that was
they
the
brought
gross,
that up,
man.
and they're like, can he really hold up? Ian Cunningham, he kind of saw him as an RG3. Poles wasn't really into him. They looked at that Heisman season, 3,812 passing yards, 1,134 rushing yards, 50 touchdowns, 4 interceptions. It was kind of framed as an outlier. Like, no, look at all the talent he had around him at LSU, which is a scout put to me is kind of ironic because when they're ripping Drake May, he's got not much at all around him in North Carolina, and they're laughing
Right.
at running all over the place. It's like, which way do you want it if you're Chicago? But
Right.
it was the point of it all. It was Caleb all the way, and hey, we'll see. It's year 2. Maybe Ryan Poles is right. If you're the GM, you want to sleep well at night. You love Caleb Williams. It'd kill you to see him having success for another team. So if Caleb Williams and Ben Johnson figure this thing out, and he is the next Patrick Mahomes, hey, they were right. They shouldn't have really considered anybody else. Like, I mean, I take that back. You should at least have a process, and there was no process. But it's a bottom line business, and we'll see how it plays out. But right now, it's not looking good. I think I've been all in on Jane Daniels since last season. This guy is a stud in many ways. He's going to put in the work. The VR stuff that you wrote about, I linked it in one of the parts here. You did the definitive story on his virtual reality work, I believe, Ben, right? Back to LSU that final season. You know, I had a source tell me that when the Bears, learned about this, hell, they probably read your story and were like, wow, this guy is using VR. He's speeding the game up. So when he does the real thing on Sunday, it slows down. Like, we got to get Caleb Williams in this.
Right.
Well, they decided not to do it because they didn't figure he'd use it anyways. So he wasn't putting in the time as a rookie. He wasn't putting in the work. That's the beauty of Ben Johnson coming in. It's now incumbent upon Caleb Williams. You better put in the time. You better put in the work. You better be able to play within the structure of this offense, or we'll find somebody who can. Um, 4 games in, there's been some good, there's been some bad. We'll see what happens.
Yeah, look, first off, you can see why people are really into Tyler stuff. It's 9:30 in the morning, and I haven't had coffee yet, and he's like flying. So you can see he's got the passion for this, and that comes across in his work, uh, and everything that he does. Yeah, look, it is again, you're right. I mean, that's what's interesting is like it's also the rare scenario where the top 3 quarterbacks, as it stands, this is very early in all their careers. You can make an argument that all of them are going to work out to varying degrees. And again, we'll see the Bears may have ultimately have gotten the right guy. Obviously, Washington, I think, pretty clear round one with what Jayden Daniels did. But as we're starting round 2, Drake May is one of the hotter quarterbacks in the league. The Patriots are a big surprise. So it's going to be fun to see where this plays out. Somebody was just asking me here about what was Washington's sense of Caleb Williams going and all this. And it's hard to say what the truth is because what I heard at the point of sort of the draft was that they I mean, Adam Peters said as much that of course, Jayden Daniels was our guy. Well, okay, he also knew Caleb Williams was not going to be an option, but okay. But that was also a notion that if for some reason, Jayden Daniels got, the UFO came down and took Jayden Daniels away, that they would have liked to go with JJ McCarthy even over Caleb Williams. Now, again, that's easier to say when Caleb Williams isn't going to be there, but that at least does at the point it was somewhat feasible. Maybe not the McCarthy part, McCarthy part of, but the Caleb part, because there were questions about like, wait, for what this team wants to do, Washington wants to reset their culture. Is this the guy that you want doing that? And that's been the part where you're like, I don't know. So we're into this season. What's been your read on how that is going? Not just Caleb Williams, the passer, but Caleb Williams, the leader. How has that been going so far?
Man, that's the trillion-dollar
The,
question.
the pause there says something. Okay,
I
but go
know it.
ahead.
I'm thinking because I have talked to people since, my series dropped because that's the next question, all right? And I try to drive that home through the series too, Ben, like, look, Ben Johnson is brilliant. Like, he will lock himself into a room and devise every solution to every question a quarterback could face on game day. Like, he will give that to you. He will be in your ear up until that 15-second mark on the shot clock. That shuts out, then you can't talk to your quarterback anymore, but he is gonna put this quarterback into fantastic situations, down in and down out, and there's a reason he was so coveted by Washington included. Everybody that had an opening wanted this guy. So I think what did surprise me a little bit is what I was told is he knew everything going into this, as he should. Like, part of me thought, 13 million a year, money talks. Yeah, of course you just take it, but maybe at the end of the day that is the case. But I was told going into this, he knew about Caleb Williams's issues when it came to processing, work ethic, how 2024 went down. He did know all of this and was willing to still take it on. And so I think the inclination is like this thing is going to get better as the season progresses. I mean, week 1 he had the great first drive and then it all falls apart. It's running around and inaccurate and operational stuff. That was a big problem last season, just knowing how to get everybody lined up and timing up motions and shifts and all of that. A lot of it would be backwards and discombobulated as a rookie. And so you saw some of that in week 1. Week 2, they get blown out by Detroit. Detroit looks like the best team in the league, or one of.
Right.
So we'll see how that plays out. Maybe it was just a buzzsaw. Week 3, you face Dallas, and they're decimated by injuries. But give Ben Johnson and Caleb Williams credit; they light them up. Week 4, I watched that Vegas game. In Vegas, it does not look like a good football team. Caleb Williams and the offense were really, really bad most of that game. But what did he do? He had a chance late in the game after a Raiders receiver dropped a 3rd and goal pass. It's still a 1-score game. He takes them down the field. They win. So I guess the arrow is going to keep pointing up because it seems, if we're going to believe what everybody's saying, that he is open to Ben Johnson's hard coaching. Everybody kind of lost their minds over the Ben Johnson interaction with Aditi, the sideline reporter for CBS, and how
Right.
pissed off he was at halftime. What was more interesting to me, earlier in the game, Aditi was talking about a conversation she had with both Ben Johnson and Caleb Williams. And Caleb and Ben said, like, day one, Ben told Caleb, here's what I like, here's what I don't like. And that Caleb even thought for a while, holy hell, like, this guy is just on me all the time. Like, what? So that was pretty telling. But you did say that they've kind of developed this working relationship. If that's substantive, if it's real, this thing could work out. I mean, Ben Johnson could turn Caleb Williams into his own AI machine who just spits out the ball exactly where he tells him to. I don't know though, man. I don't know. Like, some of these issues are are real, and is he genuinely putting in that work that Drake May is in Foxborough, that Jane Daniels is in DC? I don't know. I don't know. And they've got a stretch of games here. I mean, this will be a tough one Monday night, but they do have some winnable games after that. And then it gets really, really hard the last 8 weeks of the season. So maybe you ask me that at the end of the year. I'll give you a more
Yeah.
concise, clear answer.
No, no, it's totally fair. I mean, look, it's always the one part about scouting, everybody can look at the tape and assess a player, the quarterback's case, their ability to make certain throws or, um, you know, process the offense. But the intangibles of who they are as a person, especially at that spot where you have to be the leader, it's not just could they be, you have to be. It's just by definition of what it is. And look, I mean, I don't know Caleb Williams personally, but again, you hear the stories, and he grew up, here. He's raised here, and you know, it's not like I'm not pretending I've heard stories when he was at Gonzaga. I'm just saying, but subsequently, when he starts becoming more prominent, and this becomes not a potential, could he play back home? You start hearing more stories, and like, I don't know, I don't know about this. How do you shake that? And then he goes to Oklahoma, goes to USC. He's the number one guy, becomes the number one pick. I can imagine it's not that easy to completely revamp again, not just who you are as a player, but who you are to some degree as a person. Whereas like Jayden Daniels, who look played a ton in college, he was a starter as a freshman, was a big deal, but wasn't that level of a deal. When he went to LSU, like nobody was thinking, well, this guy's going to be the Heisman winner, number two pick in the draft. Like he was not on that trajectory. So he had, and he's also physically, like, he's got a lot of tools, but he's pretty thin, and there are things to question if you want to. People did, and I'm sure that helped drive him. Which also brings me to another point somebody else has asked here in the thread. Adam Rubin asked, like, do these guys are they motivated by the other guy, the attention that the other guy is getting? I didn't get the sense that Jayden Daniels necessarily was last year. He talked about how he had written down like CJ Stroud, the rookie stats, and like that seemed to motivate him. But from like a positive way, not like get a load of this guy, more just like, wow, this is the bar, I got to get there. But I wonder after what the year Jayden had, and they wins the head to head with the most iconic play of the regular season, for the whole regular season. Did Caleb Williams suddenly give more of a crap about Jayden Daniels? Did that motivate him? I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, but one thing that I've certainly been curious about is how did his mindset, if it all changed because Jayden Daniels sort of usurped him in terms of this rookie class.
Boy, how could it not, right? He's human. And I think this is all connected too, Ben. Your point is dead on, and there were GMs and scouts who made that same point that from high school to Oklahoma to USC to being the preordained number one overall pick in his mind, and I mean, didn't really give anybody else a chance to get to know him.
Right.
Uh, Being the first prospect to turn down medical testing, to not visiting with any other teams. I mean, hell, the Patriots flew across the country and did a rat race through all of his different handlers because he didn't have an agent, just trying to get any time with him that they could. And he said no. So he was very much like a Manchurian candidate, a quarterback that he didn't want anybody to really get too close for various reasons. But anyways, like each level, each step, he has faced adversity, but not the adversity of these other guys, right? Like not a quarterback who maybe was a 1 star, a 2 star, a 3 star out of high school who really had to grind and earn it at college. I mean, Michael Penix had 4 season-ending injuries in a row. He almost quit football. He's in tears at his college dorm, just like what is going on here. Bo Nix wasn't really a serious first round candidate up until he lights it up at Oregon, and even then, people are wondering is this somebody that can be a starter in the NFL? Jane Daniels, you're right. Like came out of nowhere. There's a GM who told me like he asked Jane Daniels point blank to try to put him on the spot. Like, man, we had this grade on you into last season. Like, what in the hell happened? So there
Yeah.
is a certain fire that burns in these other guys. I mean, Drake May that last year in North Carolina, you watch that film, not exactly surrounded by 5 stars. He had to create a lot on his own. I think there's a fire that burns in these other guys that doesn't seem like it burns in Caleb Williams, from what we were told, right? Just because he hasn't, maybe it's no fault of his own. There was a scene that a GM painted for us where USC this GM went out to the field and way before pregame just to get a sense for Caleb Williams, and he said he did this workout on his own before the pregame with his teammates, and it was unbelievable. like he's just throwing lasers. It's one of the greatest spectacles that this GM has seen in a pregame routine. And then the actual pregame routine with his teammates starts after that. And Caleb Williams is like dicking around, throwing it left-handed, not taking anything serious. He's like, man, if people watching this are probably thinking, what in the hell? If they didn't see the first thing. But isn't that
Right.
Caleb in a nutshell? Like things have come so easy for him because he's so athletically gifted, physically gifted, and he's playing these college defenses. He can run all over the place and just create that maybe you can't turn it on and turn it off easily like that in two different pregame routines. And so it's on Caleb Williams. Like if he's willing to work, the talent's there, and you can even see it in these games, right? Like even in that Raiders game when Max Crosby is chasing him all over the field, there's a play he sprints to the sideline, and I don't know how he got it off. It was an incomplete pass, but it's the prettiest, craziest incomplete pass you'll ever see. Like he can create, but that's not sustainable. He's gonna have to play with rhythm and timing in Ben Johnson's offense.
Yeah, no, it's going to be fascinating to see. And again, we get to see them go head to head this week or on Monday Night Football. They always the 4 years ever they played the two teams have played head to head, and three times it's been on national TV, which is weird because up until last year, why would you watch it? I know everybody has to go on national TV at some point, but why would you want Washington there, let alone against the Bears? But that's happened 3 out of 4 times. This one I get, but the other ones less so. Let me ask you this. I assume that in the context of, or in your reporting on Caleb Williams and with Ben Johnson coming in, that some aspect of what happened with Ben Johnson in Washington came up, at least even just in passing and joking. People like, just come on, what did you do? Why'd you do that on the plane to them? That's just, when they're flying out to sea, that's just rough. Um, but like, I remember when I wrote about it at the time, I got a lot of grief from people because I was just asking people around the league, well, what do you make of this guy turning down Washington the way they did while they're flying out to him? And yes, I know they were also going to talk to Aaron Glenn, but I mean, all right, but come on. This is more about Ben Johnson because they knew they were getting a quarterback and all those things. Uh, Boy, the people around the league were not happy with this about how Ben Johnson handled the situation to the point that when I was reporting what people were telling me, everybody just assumed I was being carrying water for Washington. I'll be honest, Washington, as has been the case with almost all their aspects, they, they were in the middle of figuring out a coach. They weren't like bitching about anything. I mean, they were, what they were internally, they weren't sharing that. So this really was a lot of people around the league saying, boy, Ben Johnson, man, what are you doing here? This is a bad look. Do you ever get a feel for what happened there from his perspective and why ultimately was he as just, I don't know, he wasn't ready, I guess, or what was the deal? What happened there?
Damn, I wish I knew. I didn't really get a ton of fresh reporting on that. Maybe I should have asked better questions because general sense around the
Well,
league.
they just in general that Ben Johnson. I mean, what? Because like you said, that's a recent interview with uh during the game where people are being like, dude, why are you being a bit of a jerk here? That he's got this level of intensity that I think for some people can go one way and others can go a different way. And I think it was also surprising at that point because Dan Campbell was the one who gets all the attention with Detroit at being this sort of maniac, and Ben Johnson does like, oh, he's this nerdy play caller, and you're like, well, this guy really does have some intensity. What he just kind of made of him then, and who he is, and maybe what is people been learning more about him.
That's definitely. Oh yeah, I mean, I've talked to people who have worked with Ben Johnson, and when they hear what Caleb Williams was like in 2024 with that staff, and they know what Ben Johnson is like as a coach, they kind of take a deep breath and say, "Oh shit, here it goes, ready or not." Like it, very, very oil and water, very different. Because Ben is extremely driven, serious. I think that he like any mad genius. Like you put in that time, you put in that amount of hours, you know what you're pouring into the profession. With some of that, there's going to be some ego. There's going to be some my way or the highway. And some of the best coaches, some of the best players ever have probably operated that way. So maybe that kind of factors into um, how he navigated two different coaching searches, right? I mean, he's been the top guy in back-to-back years. God, I wish I knew how that went down. But I think that he is somebody that I don't think he's difficult to work with, but he's he knows what he wants, and he's going to be a micromanager and maybe anal to a certain extent to build the program that he wants to build. And I saw here in Buffalo with Sean McDermott and the Bills. But I'll say this, like in both cases, it was needed. Like Rex Ryan's Bills, like I said, it was a circus. It was a country club. You didn't know what was going to happen day to day. Like they needed somebody who was that serious and had that attention to detail and micromanage. Like initially, they needed that. And the Bears, if you read this series, holy hell, do they need it? Because it's bigger than just a quarterback. It's bigger than a coach. It's bigger than a GM. You're right to the top, right to the president. And part three kind of looks at the broader picture of this all. It's a mess. And so Ben Johnson and the way he operates, it was needed. Now, that's not to say every team that is hiring a head coach should seek that personality, because I think there in Washington, hell, it worked out for the best. I think Dan Quinn is exactly what the Commanders needed when he's hired.
Right.
Uh, tells his staff, "Look, I don't want you even talking football with your players. Like, just get to know them as people. We got to start there
Right.
because
They needed to get yelled at. They needed a hug. And Dan Quinn, I mean, not just the players, everybody here. After all the we went through, like, no, could you tell us everything's gonna be okay, and not just yell at us that here's what we need to do to be winners. No. So yes, I agree. I think it kind of worked out for the best.
exactly. So I'd love to get a gauge from your readers, your viewers. It's like, yeah, you're probably pissed at Ben Johnson how that went down, but I think Dan Quinn is everything they needed because they're like right. You're talking about two organizations that have so much decay and rot and filth and ugh, it just makes you puke when you hear how they're run, but for in very different ways. And the remedy for both, although similar, I think they both kind of got a coach that they needed to address their varying degrees of rotten asbestos there.
No doubt. I've already kept you a while. Do you have a couple more seconds?
Oh, absolutely.
All right. Well, I want to ask you one more thing about the Bears, and then I want to pivot to a different topic. But so, like, leaning sort of more into this game, the Bears not only brought in Ben Johnson, they upgraded the offensive line significantly. Over the last couple of years, they've added a lot of pieces to the skill positions. Rome Odunze is having a breakout year. I really liked him at Washington. What have they done that's been working for them to help Caleb Williams around him? And maybe from the perspective of this game for Washington, what's the thing that maybe the Bears are still struggling with from your sense that maybe Washington can take advantage of?
I think holistically, you look at the roster 1 through 53, and there's a ton of holes. I mean, Ryan Poles has it's still insane to me that he was extended with his record, and I get it. Like most GMs, they should have the chance to get their guy at quarterback, and then you judge that GM, right? Like, I understand that, and I understand that too many owners are firing people left and right, and they're not giving enough leeway. But there is a sense around the NFL, like wins and losses do kind of matter. And you look at the draft picks, some of the signings. I guess there's been some promising ones kind of mixed in, but Tremaine Edmonds, right? Like saw him here in Buffalo, he looks the part. What 6'4", 240, whatever he is. You drop him into the middle of the defense with that long wingspan. He's going to do stuff that doesn't show up in a box score, taking away passing lanes and whatnot. And then you see him like on that Ashton Genty touchdown run against Vegas. It's like, oh yeah, that's what you saw in Buffalo. That's what you've seen in Chicago. It's not 4 years, 72 million. He's got some problems, and you let Roquan Smith walk before that. The Chase Claypool trade blew up. Um, Ryan Poles is really he played offensive line. He had a cup of coffee with the Bears in a training camp himself, and he does kind of fashion himself as a builder of offensive lines. But so many of their picks from the top all the way down in the draft have combusted and not worked out. So there's holes on this roster, but there's some hope, and you know, I think Ben Johnson has personnel power there. I don't think he'd take the job if he didn't.
Right.
So you look at this past off season, and you get Joe Tooney, you get Jonah Jackson, you get Drew Dahlman. The interior of the line is going to be better. You're able to draft Colston Loveland. Now he finally was kind of worked into the offense. Luther Burden, same thing. So a couple of weapons that factor into what you want to do offensively. and he's the one dialing up the plays. So I think there's going to be open receivers. They're going to scheme some stuff up, but I think that defensively, there's so many issues with this team, and the Commanders are getting healthier. You tell me. I got Terry McLaurin in a fantasy lineup, like a lot of your. Is he playing? Like you're getting some of these guys back, and Jane Daniels, he is such a threat, man. Like you can just see the fear in linebackers' body language and mannerisms when he is at that mesh point with Bill, and you don't know if he's going to pull it. You don't know if he's going to hand it off. There's no way to defend that really. So I love the Commanders matchup here when you're looking at the Bears are going to be a little healthier out of their bye week, but it looks like Jane Daniels is healthy. The receiving core is getting healthier, and you saw some of those signs last week against a very good LA Chargers defense that everything we saw in 24 was no fluke. That you're going to see it in 25.
I mean, it is hard to assess Washington after 5 games because Jayden Daniels missed 2, and the one of the games he played in, the one he got hurt, was the offense was a mess against Green Bay. Harry McLaurin's now missed the last 2. They haven't had Noah Brown, their other outside receiver, for 3. They were missing their best blocking tight end. The offensive line had moving pieces. And yeah, Bill has looked good from the jump, but it wasn't until this last game that he looked like they were finally willing to say, okay, he's going to be the lead. So whenever McLaurin does come back, and it's like, okay, now it's like a bit of a reset to assess where this group is. And even by the way, this last game, I keep saying Jane Daniels was more smart than spectacular, which he's a very astute guy, but like a lot of these players, he wants to make every play at all times, and that can get him into some injury trouble. This game, he was more willing to throw the ball away and slide. And if that part of his game is maturing on top of the other stuff, I mean, again, look out. Uh, Everybody else, so yeah, I'm fascinated to see as Washington goes forward here, and we'll see about McLaurin today. We're talking Wednesday morning because of the extra day. We won't get an injury report. I don't think until tomorrow. So we'll see. I don't know. He hasn't practiced. He hasn't even done anything yet, as far as we know, practice wise. So I can't sit here and tell you to put him in your fantasy lineup yet. But when he's ready.
I like that
Uh,
you get back around to what matters most here.
uh,
My fantasy lineup. Everybody loves hearing about other people's fantasy teams, right? That's really the market that you
well,
should.
no, that's the thing. Going into it, it's fine to discuss because you're break. Like I have Corey Krosky Merritt on the team, and it's fine to be like that. But afterwards, nobody wants to hear. If only this hadn't happened, I would have won. Or if I got lucky. Nobody wants to hear that stuff. Let me ask you this before I let you go. We obviously spent this top here talking about your journey to Substack and how it's worked. And look, again, this Bears deep dive you did. It's not the only one you did. You're not hanging your head on one thing. You do this quite a bit. You did a feature on Brian Robinson a couple years ago here, a really good one. Coming off of obviously his near tragic situation, getting shot, then bouncing back, and that was a really good profile. You do that every week. And you've won, there's different awards, the APSE, which is, this fancy editors voting on stuff, or the PFWA, the Pro Football Writers Association. You've been recognized in these forums. And yet, because now I'm going through this a little bit myself in the Substack world, because we're doing this individually, and because Substack is not viewed as ESPN or The Athletic or whatever, I don't want to act like it's second class citizenship, as in like, woe is us. But it's not viewed as, hey, this person was doing this job for a long time and now they're doing it over here, and it should be somewhat a smooth transition. It's not. It doesn't feel like it's viewed that way. My sense for you is kind of the same. That despite all that you're doing here, you still have to some degree. I think you've been around enough to prove yourself to teams like, hey, no, this guy's good, credential him, whatever. But it shouldn't feel like there's even more of a conversation that maybe needs to be had. What do you kind of sense of where we are right now in this evolution of not just in terms of Substack, but like legacy media, as we've seen, is massive turnover. The Athletic didn't even exist several years ago. Now that's changed a lot. What do you kind of make of where Substack is, where Go Long is in this sort of ecosystem of the NFL legacy media that I think needs a change?
You know what, Ben? I'm actually encouraged. Believe it or not, that was a big fear of mine, taking this leap of faith, right? In the middle of COVID, when you couldn't even really do anything, right?
Right.
Everything shuts down. Everything's on Zoom. Everything's siloed off. And I remember wondering, like, are teams even going to let us back in the locker room? Like, what a great excuse to kick us out for good. With
Yeah.
a pandemic to say, this worked really good. You guys can just be on Zoom and do your jobs. I mean, you go over to Europe, like with these European soccer leagues, and
Oh, sounds
oh,
awful. The mixed zones.
awful. That's
Oh,
terrible. Like, I don't know how people can even do their jobs, right? So that was a fear. I was able to approach not just teams, but agents and players years past and say, hey, Milwaukee Journal Sentinel. And that's when everybody was reading the newspaper. Now I feel like a dinosaur myself. Uh, Buffalo News. There would be an inclination for people to talk to. And then Bleacher Report. I kind of caught them as they're blowing up and a lot of players are on the app and they want to sit down. You're getting great access, all of that. So I didn't know what to expect. I do think though that when your reputation can speak for yourself when you're covering, in your case, a team for a while, NFL, like your work, people remember it, they read it, they can see it, they can hear it. They know you have influence, and you've got a large audience of people that want to consume your content, and that matters regardless of where you're at. And so early on, yeah, some teams would respond, some teams wouldn't, some agents would respond, some wouldn't, and I never really tried to think of it down those lines. I I think like and you're such an independent thinker yourself. I mean, that's why you created your Substack and it's already extremely successful. But there's so many people in our business covering the NFL that are beholden to access journalism and are beholden to that credential and think, oh, yeah, they like kind of being a part of the machine, dressing up nice for game day and being in the scrum, being at the press conference, everybody's sharing that makes me so sick, man. When you're around some of these beats and everybody's just sharing transcriptions and helping each other out, like you guys should be at each other's throats competitively. You're competing for
that
eyeballs. Like you can be friendly. I mean, some of my best friends in the business, we wanted to tear each other's hearts out on the beat. I mean, Matt Fairburn here in Buffalo to this day is one of my best friends. Back in the Green Bay days, like Kareem Copeland was at the Press Gazette. Like he's there in Washington. I was at the Journal
yeah.
Sentinel. We would hand all the time, but when it came to work, like we're not helping each other out. And I think since then, 15 years later, so many of these beats just kind of not all of them. I mean, don't get me wrong. I don't want to make a blanket statement. There's some really good beat writers doing some kick-ass work all over the country, but a lot just they don't care if they have the same bland story as the guy next to them inside of a locker room. So that's our advantage. Like we don't have to be beholden to the mob. We can kind of think for ourselves. And I think when I do these stories, like the Bears story, like the Bears series, a couple years back, I did a series on Sean McDermott and the Buffalo Bills. I don't necessarily need to be in the building. If phones exist, I'm going around the country talking to other people who know other people who know other people, and you kind of build your web out of sources. And the Buffalo thing was really interesting. I've talked about it at Go Long multiple times, but that for living here, and like I said, I covered the team for whatever reason. I wasn't credentialed for a while, and I had frank conversations with the public relations department about it and just said, "Look, I'm going to continue to meet up with players for wings and do features." I did a show with Isaiah McKenzie in town. I did a story on how 13 seconds went down, the game against the Chiefs. They're continuing to do the job. And through the course of that reporting, that's what led to a big series on the coach December of 2023. And to their credit, after that happened, I sat down with Derek Boyko, Bill's PR, Sean McDermott, the head coach at the combine, just had a great conversation. Didn't even talk about the series like I thought Sean would. And we built up a really productive working relationship. I've been back in the building, done several features since then, covered games, still with a critical eye. When the season ended, didn't hold back, when they lose to the Chiefs again. But we all want the same thing. We all just want to do our jobs, talk to as many people as we can, tell stories. Some are going to be pretty, some not so pretty. And I think I get to answer your question. I try not to think in terms of I need a credential to to do my job to make that happen. That there's other means and other ways to talk to 53 guys in a locker room. And yeah, to this day, there's teams I write about frequently, and I'm not credentialed through them, but there's creative ways to work around any infrastructure to do the job.
Yeah. No, and that part is a completely true. I mean, not to talk about me, but the only way that I'm even here today that I had the chance to be at the Athletic slash New York Times was because when I was when I was freelancing, I said, okay, let me see, how do I make this work? And after watching what was happening around me, one of the first things I said was, if I write the same story as the Washington Post, that's a loss. That's a bad day. So don't do that. And then, like you said, like what else is it? Like everybody does get into the hive mind a bit, whatever the topic may be, and you got to work around that. Sometimes I can go maybe a little too far, but like you got to work around that. Right, it doesn't. You don't have to be in the building to do it. If you have a good instincts and a critical eye for what you're looking at, and you can talk to some people, then that helps. But I think on some level, to me, this is almost more about a um not what's the word I'm looking for? Like a certain amount of like respect. Like it's like just because you don't work for the masthead that is the thing, or behind a corporation that has millions of dollars poured into covering the sport, doesn't mean that your coverage is less than or should be like as an individual who's proven yourself over time. It feels like that should be accepted, and that's why like so the more people who were like me this past year and you in the past find themselves perhaps, hey, what do I do now? If you've had a good reputation, it doesn't feels like that to me should be as important as where you worked. It doesn't matter. It's who's the person because some people work for places and they're garbage, but or they don't do things the right way. And PR will say that, but they can't do much about it because they work for a legacy media company.
Here's our advantage too. It's the fact we have to be original. We have to be fresh. We have to be different to earn a living, right? Like fans are smart. Like they're consuming all this coverage from all these different outlets. If we just produce the same stuff that everybody else is, nobody's going to subscribe. Nobody's going to give a shit. Like we we have to be different to build a business. And I think that entrepreneurial spirit is real. Like I said, I always throw in the caveat. There are people covering the NFL who do a hell of a job, but there's a lot that are just, you're that paycheck's coming in every couple weeks regardless, right? So why in the hell would you rock the boat? Why in the hell would you place a few calls that might be uncomfortable? Right? A few coaches might say things about Caleb Williams, which, oh, by the way, like I talked to some of Drake May's former coaches that got fired, and no sour grapes there. One of them said he's going to be a top 5 quarterback next year, an absolute stud. So, the sour grapes thing, that criticism. But we're gonna go places others will not, or cannot, or unwilling to, because we got to be different and original and take some
Right.
chance. And I think that is, and it doesn't necessarily mean you've got to, drop an atomic bomb on a on an organization. It's just writing those like the stories that you they're on, like the VR stuff with Jayden Daniels. Like just thinking out, you're gonna think outside the box in different ways when, uh, that's the ultimate motivation. Like we've got to build a business, right? We're not just gonna punch in and punch out.
Right.
It's we talked about this before you launched, and I get all excited. Justin Rogers, same thing, covering the Lions. I get excited talking about it because it's so reinvigorating. Yeah, like there's a lot of pressure. Like I said, we got 3 kids, and they got 3 mouths to feed, and my wife is able to stay at home and be a mom, and I love that pressure of you got. Hey, we better write some shit that makes a difference that people want to read, or else we got to find something else. And I think that pressure doesn't exist for a lot of people covering the NFL at those legacy outlets that you're referencing.
Yeah, no, for sure. All right. Well, look, as Howard Stern would say, you have said it all. I really appreciate the insight both into Caleb Williams, the Bears, and this industry. And you definitely were somebody who really helped me both in terms of just watching how you did this, but also talking to me on the side and helping me feel better about my lot in life and that this was something that could actually work. And so far, so good. Tell everybody before I let you go what else they need to know about Go Long and what you maybe have coming up this week that people should keep an eye out for.
Hey, thanks so much, man. Yeah, right now I do have a longer form piece on Mike Vrabel, Drake May, and the Patriots. If people want to check it out, I think Commander fans would probably like to see that as well
Sure.
because at the top of the draft. But it looks back at how things ended with Bill Belichick, Gerard Mayo, and the fall of that empire was a little uglier than what I was anticipating. So that was interesting, and In terms of Commander stuff, I did a story ahead of their playoff run last year on Dan Quinn, and I think the headline that people punch into Google is like "Inside the Transformation of Dan Quinn's." Yeah, there it is. Inside Dan Quinn's total transformation of the Washington Commanders. So, enjoyed talking to a lot of those assistant coaches on what he did behind the scenes to turn this thing around so fast. I mean, Jayden Daniels is um, exceptional, but it's not just a one man's Midas touch. I think they needed the environment to kind of take this thing to a new level, and especially where they were. So, if people want to read that, that might be interesting ahead of this game day.
Yeah, no, awesome. But hey, I highly recommend go read everything here on Go Long, and you won't be disappointed. Tyler, really appreciate it. Again, the time today, the time over the last few months that behind the scenes have been big help. And yeah, I look forward to chatting again. If I can, if this Jay Daniels, Caleb Williams thing keeps going, I think it will. We'll have more to talk about. But I really appreciate it, man.
Hey, pleasure's all here, Ben. Thanks so much for having me, and thanks to everybody who makes their way over to Go Long as well.
Well, I mean, and everybody else here, thanks for listening. Again, I'll have more. I'll tack on some other stuff with regards on the main podcast. So you can check that out as well. But Tyler, you rock. We'll talk later. See you, man.